Hi, 7th grade. Today we're going to be talking about identifying an author's point of view in informational text. Now, this is different than literary text because in literary text, an author's point of view would be talking more about the amount of information that the author gives the reader when they're reading a passage. In informational text, the author's point of view is actually identifying the opinion of the author in using the claim, evidence, and reasoning that they put in their writing. So today we're going to talk about basically finding the author's opinion in a piece of informational text about a topic. For a while now, you guys have been practicing writing your own CERs. In this skill, you're basically analyzing the CER of somebody else. So being a critical reader means that you can identify the opinions that an author is sharing with you, even if it's not completely obvious in their writing. In fact, most of the time, it's not going to be super obvious. They're not going to say, my opinion is this. It's more going to be subtle hints that you'll find in their claims, evidence, and reasoning that help you know if they are for something or against something. So, just like you use 3 steps when you write a CER to share your answer or opinion about something, authors also use this same process to share their opinion about a topic. I want you to go ahead and write down what's highlighted in red, and these are just kind of from a reader's standpoint, the 3 parts of informational text that you would look at when you're deciding an opinion. So the first is the claim, and that is the statement of their opinion. So the example I gave you here is that school uniforms are not good for students. Now keep in mind that when I give you this example, I did not say, I think, or my opinion is, school uniforms are not good for students. You have to read it closely because it's not just going to tell you straight up what the opinion is. You have to read between the lines a little bit. So after the claim, as you guys know when you're writing, you follow that up with evidence. So when identifying an author's point of view, typically the evidence is going to support the author's opinion. That's just good writing, right? So if I'm writing an opinion piece about school uniforms, a fact that I might give is 95% of families report a high cost related to providing students with uniforms for school, as well as other clothes for when they are not in school. To be honest, that's a fact I made up, but it's an example of a fact that you might see that would support that opinion about school uniforms. So again, go ahead and write down the definition of evidence that's highlighted in red. And lastly, the reasoning. So the reasoning is how the author ties the evidence to their claim. So after they've shared their opinion, they've given you evidence, they then tie those 2 things together to make sense out of them. So in the example that I'm using here, therefore, uniforms create an extra cost to families that many cannot afford. So it's just making the argument extra strong by explicitly stating how the evidence proves their opinion. Okay, so again, write down the definition of reasoning that's highlighted in red. We're now going to go through an example together, and the very first step, actually, of finding the author's point of view is figuring out the question that could be debated either way. So our question that we're going to focus on is, should Halloween always be on a Saturday? Now, you might have your own opinion on this, right? And this is one of the harder parts of this skill, is taking your own beliefs and your own opinion out of the equation and just focusing on what the author is telling you. So, should Halloween always be on a Saturday? Go ahead and write down this example claim. Halloween should never happen during the week. So there's my claim. The author is giving me their opinion, and now we're probably going to see some evidence to go along with it. So, should Halloween always be celebrated on a Saturday? Halloween should never happen during the week. So, the evidence to back up that opinion is that when children are trick-or-treating during the week, there is a major increase in children being hit by cars, especially once it becomes dark outside. So here's a fact that would support the fact that Halloween should not happen during the week. Typically, traffic is heavier during the week around the afternoon and evening time because a lot of people are driving home from work. So the evidence shows that there's a major increase in children being hit by cars when Halloween falls on a weekday. Okay, so go ahead and write down the evidence that's highlighted in red, and then we're going to take a look at how the author ties the evidence and the claim together with their reasoning. So this is where they make it very clear, where they're referring to rush hour traffic and a lot of people driving home from work. So in their reasoning, they say, therefore, it is safer for students to celebrate on a Saturday when rush hour and heavy traffic after work hours would be less. So do you see how the claim and the evidence kind of go together, but until you get that reasoning piece in there, then the connection isn't quite as strong. Okay, but really here, now we have all three pieces of the author's CER, and now we're going to just take a look at how the author uses these three pieces to share their opinion. Okay, so the claim, Halloween should always be celebrated on a Saturday. Evidence, when children are trick-or-treating during the week, there's a major increase in traffic accidents, especially when it is dark outside. Reasoning, therefore, it is safer for students to celebrate on a Saturday when rush hour and heavy traffic after work hours would be less. Okay, so you're probably going to get some questions in language arts class as well as in this Howl class about identifying an author's point of view. And so you're creating a short answer that analyzes how the author shares this argument. And this is an example pretty much that you can use as a tool to help you know what to write when you get a question about author's point of view in informational text. So it's just a short answer. I start the first sentence is just kind of my own words. Based on the CER on the previous page, the author supports Halloween being celebrated on a Saturday because of the safety of children. So in my own words, I kind of summarized everything that I read in the author's CER about Halloween. Then I'm going to use some evidence. The author states that there's a major increase in children being hit by cars, especially once it becomes dark outside. There's my text evidence. Now, the text evidence I use also happens to be the evidence the author used, so depending on the situation, that may or may not be the case for your questions you were answering. Then finally, because there are so many children outside trick-or-treating and the amount of traffic tends to be heavier during the week, there are some safety concerns when it comes to Halloween falling on a weekday. So I'm basically just recapping what the author thinks and what the author stated. So most of the time, when you're doing the author's point of view, when you're analyzing a piece of text, the piece of text that you get is going to be much longer than this example. But for the sake of time, I didn't want to go through a super long text because you're going to be practicing this skill throughout the rest of the week, to be honest with you. So we're going to start talking about the Spanish flu today, and you guys are then going to identify an author's point of view and figure out the claims, evidence, and reasoning that they use to prove their argument. Wonderful job, 7th grade. Good luck on the rest of the week.